He pressed the crease in his new suit, staring at his reflection. He saw a man destined for greatness, held back only by the simple, plain woman in the kitchen behind him. His wife, Emily, was a quiet librarian, a woman of simple tastes and simpler ambitions. He was going to Newport, to the glittering world of the elite, and he was going alone. He told her she wouldn't fit in. What he didn't know is that the exclusive world he was desperate to enter didn't just know his wife, it belonged to her. And the yacht everyone was dying to get on. It was just her family's summer boat. Liam straightened his Breitling watch, a self-satisfied glint in his eye. It was an entry-level model, but it was real, and in the sterile beige and white world of his upper-middle-class apartment, it felt like a crown. He was a senior analyst at Sterling Price Investments, a shark in a tank of minnows, and he was circling something big. In the kitchen, Emily hummed softly, wiping down a counter. She wore a faded Gap cardigan over a simple t-shirt. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple, functional ponytail. She was in every sense of the word ordinary. They had met 5 years ago. He had been a charming, ambitious junior associate. She had been a shy, bookish grad student working at the university library. He'd seen her as sweet, stable, and most importantly, uncomplicated. She would be the perfect supportive backdrop for his meteoric rise. But 5 years on her simplicity had begun to grate on him. It felt less like a backdrop and more like an anchor. "Are you still wearing that sweater, Emily?" he asked, his voice dripping with a practiced, weary patience. "It has pills all over the sleeve." Emily stopped wiping and looked down. "Oh, I hadn't noticed. It's comfortable." "Comfort isn't going to get us invited to the Sterling summer party, is it?" he scoffed, walking over to the espresso machine, a Jura, his one real splurge. "Life is about presentation, darling. You should know that by now." I like my work at the city library," she said quietly, turning back to the sink. "The children's reading program is doing really well." Liam sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "The library? Yes, of course. How's that revolutionary new cataloging system coming along?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Look this weekend. The Coastal Legacy Invitational in Newport. It's a huge deal. Mr. Sterling is going to be there. His daughter Serafina is hosting the pre-gala at Marble House." Emily's hands stilled in the soapy water. "Newport? That sounds lovely. I haven't been since I was She paused. "A long time ago." Liam took a sip of his espresso, the bitterness sharp on his tongue. "Ah, about that. This isn't really a +1 kind of thing. It's high-level networking, Emily. We're talking about the partners' board members, people who decide the future of the firm. You'd be bored stiff." The silence that followed was heavier than her usual quiet. "You don't want me to come?" she stated. It wasn't a question. "It's not that I don't want you to come," he lied smoothly, a skill he'd perfected at the office. "It's just that I need to be on. I need to focus, to move and shake. I can't be worried about whether my wife is having a good time or if she's managed to spill canapes on a hedge fund manager. You understand, don't you? It's for us. For our future." Emily dried her hands slowly on a dish towel. She looked at him, her grey eyes unreadable for a moment. He'd always found her gaze a bit empty. Now it just looked tired. "Yes, Liam," she said, her voice flat. "I understand. For our future. You should pack your new Tom Ford suit. The blue one." He brightened. "Exactly. See, you get it." He hadn't even told her he'd bought it, charging it to a card she didn't know he had. He'd told her he was getting his old suit tailored. "That's my girl. You just hold down the fort here. Maybe buy yourself a new sweater or something." He kissed her on the forehead, a sterile, dismissive gesture, and grabbed his briefcase. As he walked out the door, he was already mentally composing his first text to Serafina Sterling. "On my way. Can't wait to see you. L." He was so focused on the future he was building that he never once looked back. He didn't see Emily stand perfectly still in the kitchen, her back straight, her hands clenched by her sides. He didn't see the single cold tear that traced a path down her cheek. And he certainly didn't hear the first quiet words she spoke to the empty room after the lock clicked shut. "He's going," she whispered. "He's really going to do it." She walked into their small home office, past the shelves of his unread Wall Street Journal compilations and leadership trophies. She sat at her simple, unassuming desk and opened a drawer. Tucked beneath a stack of library pamphlets was a slim black satellite phone. She pressed one button. It rang twice. A crisp, British-accented voice answered instantly. "Julian, we were wondering if you'd be calling." Emily's entire demeanor shifted. The slump in her shoulders vanished. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer the soft, mousy hum of a librarian. It was clear, aristocratic, and sharp as surgical steel. "Julian," she said. "He's attending the invitational. He believes I'm unsuitable to accompany him." There was a pause on the other end. "The arrogance is breathtaking. Madam, what are your instructions?" "I'm done hiding," Emily said, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with a cold, rising fury. "I'm done being ordinary. He wants to see the world of the elite fine. Prepare the vanguard. Have the Armani Privé ready. And Julian, yes, madame, tell father I'm coming home, and I'm bringing a problem." Newport, Rhode Island, was a different universe. It wasn't just wealthy. It was historic wealth, a place where families didn't talk about their money, because they assumed everyone else already knew. Liam, driving his leased BMW 3 Series, felt a surge of adrenaline as he passed the stone gates of the opulent Gilded Age mansions lining Bellevue Avenue. This was where he belonged. The pre-gala was at Marble House, a palace of white marble built by the Vanderbilts. Liam handed his keys to the valet, with a flourish adjusting the cuffs of his Tom Ford suit. He felt like a king. He found Serafina Sterling by the grand staircase, holding court. She was everything Emily was not: tall, blonde, draped in a glittering Chanel gown, with a laugh that was both a melody and a command. Her father, Harrison Sterling, stood beside her, a portly man, with a shark's smile. "Liam, you made it," Serafina trilled, detaching herself from a congressman and gliding over. She kissed his cheek, letting her lips linger just a fraction too long. Her perfume was Baccarat Rouge 540. It smelled like burnt sugar and money. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Serafina," Liam said, his voice smooth as honey. He kissed her hand. "You look breathtaking. The Vanderbilts themselves would be jealous." "Flatterer," she laughed. "Daddy, you remember Liam from the acquisitions team?" Harrison Sterling grunted, giving Liam a firm, assessing handshake. "Liam. Good. You're the one with the numbers on the new tech merger. Sharp." "Thank you, sir. I believe we're poised for a major Q4 win," Liam said, slipping into his boardroom persona. "Good, good. Business tomorrow," Harrison said, gesturing with his champagne flute. "Tonight we network. See that man over there? That's the comptroller for the state of New York. Go say hello. but don't mention the new tax bill." For the next 2 hours, Liam was in heaven. He schmoozed, he charmed, he listened intently, he dropped strategic compliments. He was a natural. Serafina stayed near him, her hand often finding the small of his back, a silent proprietary signal to the rest of the room. Later they found a moment alone on the vast stone terrace overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. The moon painted a silver stripe on the dark water. "You're very good at this, Liam," Serafina murmured, leaning against him. "I know this world," he said, breathing in her expensive scent. "This is where I'm meant to be, not stuck in, well, you know." Serafina's eyes sharpened. "You mean with your little mouse, the librarian?" Liam stiffened. He hadn't told her that much. "We've discussed this. It's complicated. She's a good woman, just not on this level. She doesn't have the drive, the ambition. Her world is small. And yours isn't," Serafina finished for him. "My father is looking for a new vice president of global strategy. It's a big step. It comes with a new office, a new apartment in the Tribeca high-rise, and new expectations." Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. Expectations. He values loyalty, strength. He hates weakness. He hates messy entanglements, she said, tracing the lapel of his suit. He needs to know his VPs have the right partners. Partners who reflect the firm's values. The implication hung in the salty air between them. Get rid of the wife. "My entanglement," Liam said, choosing his words carefully, "is not messy. It's a simple procedure, a matter of timing. After I secure my new position, I'll be streamlining my personal portfolio." Serafina smiled, a slow, predatory curving of her lips. "Good, because tomorrow is the main event, the invitational, and everyone who is anyone will be there." "I heard a rumor," Liam said, leaning in, "that the Vanguard is in port." Serafina's eyes widened. "Don't be ridiculous. The Vanguard Marcus Thorne's yacht. It's a ghost. It's never seen at public events. They say it's more secure than the Pentagon." "My sources say it's here," Liam bluffed, having overheard a valet. "And I'm going to get us on board." Serafina looked at him, truly impressed. "Get me on Marcus Thorne's yacht, Liam, if you could pull that off. Daddy wouldn't just make you VP. He'd make you his heir apparent." Liam grinned, feeling invincible. "Consider it done." He pulled out his phone to check his messages. One text from Emily sent hours ago. "Have a good time. I'm going to visit an old friend for a couple of days. The house will be empty when you get back." He scoffed. "An old friend? Probably some other librarian." He typed a quick reply. "Sounds nice. Enjoy your book club. Busy here. Don't wait up." He put the phone away, silencing it. He didn't have time for the small, ordinary world. He was in Newport, on the verge of claiming his destiny. He turned back to Serafina, and under the Gilded Age moonlight, he kissed her. It tasted like champagne and victory. While Liam was sealing his fate on a moonlit terrace, Emily was in motion. The old friend she was visiting was in fact Julian. After her call, a black unlisted Maybach S680 had pulled silently into the alley behind her apartment building. She had exited through the service entrance, carrying a single simple duffel bag. Now she was in a Gulfstream G700, a private jet so exclusive it made the Sterling Price Company, Jet, look like a regional hopper. She had showered and changed. The faded cardigan was gone, replaced by a simple but exquisitely cut Loro Piana cashmere turtleneck and silk trousers. Her hair was down, brushed to a shining chestnut waterfall. She wore no makeup, but her face, now free of its practiced submissive mask, was striking. She had the sharp, aristocratic bones and clear, intelligent eyes of her father. "We will be landing at Newport State Airport in 20 minutes, madame," Julien said. He was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed with the quiet competence of a man who managed a global empire from the shadows. He was technically the CEO of the Thorne family office, but his primary role had always been her protector. "Thank you, Julien. Is my father... is he angry?" Emily asked, staring out the window at the clouds below. "Angry?" Julien permitted himself a small, dry smile. "Mr. Thorne is... disappointed, is the word he used. He is disappointed that a man could be in possession of a priceless jewel and mistake it for common quartz. He is furious that this man has caused you a moment's pain." "I caused my own pain," Emily said bitterly. "I was the one who wanted to live a normal life. I was the one who met him at the library, introduced myself as Emily Brown, and let him believe I was just me. I thought he loved me, Julien. The real me, the person who loves dusty books and quiet mornings." "He may have once," Julien said gently. "But a man like Liam, he is not built to love a person. He is built to love what a person can get him. You were an asset, and when he decided you were a non-performing asset, he sought to liquidate." Emily winced at the cold financial terms, but she nodded. "He's been seeing Serafina Sterling for at least 6 months. I found the Chanel receipts, the hotel reservations at the St. Regis." "We know," Julien said. "The security team's report has been on your father's desk for 3 months. He was waiting for your word." You knew?" Emily felt a flush of shame. "Mr. Thorne respects your privacy and your choices, Emily, even the ones he disagrees with. He would not intervene in your marriage. But he will protect his family. And you, madame, are his family. Liam, however, is not." The jet began its smooth descent. "There's something else," Julien said, pulling a tablet from his briefcase. "As you requested, we ran a deep audit on Liam's accounts at Sterling Price, as well as his personal finances. And he's not just an adulterer, madam. He's a thief." Julian's voice was cold. "He's been using a shell corporation in Delaware to skim from the firm's expense accounts, small amounts at first, but in the last 6 months, as his friendship with Miss Sterling has escalated, so has the theft. He's funneled over $800,000. Emily felt sick. It wasn't just betrayal. It was all sordid. He's been stealing from Harrison Sterling, yes, which frankly is a case of one shark eating another. But more importantly, on the tech merger he's spearheading, he's been accessing proprietary data and attempting to sell it to a rival firm. He's not just a cheat, he's an industrial spy." Emily closed her eyes. The quiet, sweet man she thought she'd married was a complete fabrication. A ghost. The ambitious, dismissive husband he'd become was the real man. "What he's doing is not only grounds for termination," Julien said. "It's grounds for a federal indictment. Wire fraud, embezzlement, corporate espionage." "I see." Emily opened her eyes, and the last trace of the meek librarian was gone. In her grey eyes a storm was gathering. "So when I see him tomorrow, I won't be ending a marriage. I'll be streamlining a personal portfolio." She used Liam's own words, and they tasted like ash. "Precisely," Julien said. The jet touched down so smoothly she barely felt it. A black Rolls-Royce Cullinan was waiting on the tarmac, its engine purring. "Your father is waiting for you on the Vanguard," Julian said, opening the door for her. He cancelled his meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister to be here. Emily stepped out into the cool, salty night air. "Good, because tomorrow when Liam tries to get on that yacht, I want to be the one to tell him no." "Oh." Julian smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. "I think we can do much, much better than that." Liam woke up in his Hotel Viking suite feeling like a god. His head throbbed from the champagne, but it was a celebratory ache. Serafina had left only an hour ago, with a promise to save him a seat at the main event. He showered, ordered a $60 room service breakfast, and reviewed his plan. Getting on the Vanguard was the key. He'd spent the morning making calls using every bit of leverage and bluff he had. He'd finally gotten a name: Julian Alistair Marcus Thorns, gatekeeper. He'd tried calling Alistair's office, only to be met by a polite but impenetrable assistant who informed him that Mr. Thorn's schedule is not public. Fine. If he couldn't get in the front door, he'd find a side one. He still had his bluff. Serafina and her father didn't need to know how he got them on, just that he did. He'd show up, create a scene, drop names, and act like he belonged. In his experience, 90% of security was just a confidence game. He dressed with meticulous care. Not the tux from last night, but a custom-tailored linen suit, a pale blue shirt, and no tie. The perfect yachting elite look. He checked his Breitling 11:00 a.m. Time to go. He met Harrison and Serafina at the entrance to the invitational section of the marina. The area was cordoned off with velvet ropes and guarded by stone-faced men in crisp blue blazers. The air was thick with the smell of salt money and entitlement. "There he is," Serafina trilled, kissing him boldly. "Daddy Liam is going to get us onto the Vanguard. Can you believe it?" Harrison grunted, though his eyes were alight with greed. "Thorn's boat. I've been trying to get a meeting with him for a decade. If you pull this off, son, that VP office is just the start." "Follow me," Liam said, projecting an aura of absolute certainty. They walked down the gleaming mahogany docks past yachts that were themselves the size of mansions, but they were all dinghies compared to what lay at the end of Pier A. The Vanguard. It wasn't a yacht. It was a floating fortress. 350 feet of sleek obsidian grey hull with teak decks and smoked glass windows. A helicopter, a Sikorsky S-76, was perched on the rear deck. There was no branding, no flag of convenience. Just a quiet, terrifying statement of power. A single gangway led up to the deck, guarded by 2 men. They weren't the blazer-clad event security. They were tall, fit, and wore dark, tailored suits with clear earpieces. They looked less like deckhands and more like Secret Service. "See?" Serafina whispered, her confidence wavering. "I told you. It's impossible." "Watch me," Liam said. He strode forward, his chest out. "Good morning, gentlemen," Liam said, flashing his most charming smile. Liam. He didn't use his last name, Harrison Sterling, and Serafina Sterling. "We're here to see Mr. Thorn." The first guard, a man with a shaved head and a jaw like a block of granite, didn't even look at him. He spoke into his wrist. "Mr. Alistair, we have a Liam, a Sterling, and a Sterling at the checkpoint. Unscheduled." A voice crackled in his earpiece, too low to hear. The guard looked up, his eyes flat and void. "I'm sorry, sir. Your names are not on the list." "There must be a mistake," Liam said, his smile tightening. "I'm a personal guest of Emily. She's expecting us." He threw his wife's name out as a wild card, a bluff. The guard's expression didn't flicker. "There is no one by that name on our manifest." "Now see here," Harrison Sterling blustered, stepping forward. "I am Harrison Sterling of Sterling Price Investments. I demand to speak to Marcus Thorne." "No one speaks to Mr. Thorne uninvited, sir," the second guard said, resting a hand calmly on the small of his back, where his suit jacket bulged slightly. Liam felt a bead of sweat trickle down his collar. This was not going as planned. His confidence was failing. "Liam," Serafina hissed, her voice sharp with embarrassment. "You said you had this handled. You're making us look like fools." Just wait," Liam stammered. Let me call my contact." He fumbled for his phone, his hands suddenly clumsy. He had no one to call. He was going to have to bribe them. He pulled out his wallet, fishing for a 100,000. "Perhaps this will clear up the confusion," Liam said, holding out a fan of $100 bills. The first guard looked at the money. He looked at Liam's face, and for the first time he smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Sir," the guard said, "that might buy you a lobster roll on the boardwalk. Now please step away from the gangway. You are creating a disturbance." "A disturbance?" Harrison roared. "I'll have your job. I'll have this whole... Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" The voice was new. It was quiet, British, and cut through the bluster like a diamond blade. They all turned. A man in an immaculate dark grey Brioni suit was standing at the top of the gangway. It was Julian Alistair. Liam recognized him instantly from his Google search. This was his chance. "Mr. Alistair," Liam exclaimed, pushing forward. "Thank God. A misunderstanding. I'm Liam. This is Harrison and Serafina Sterling. We're here for the viewing. Please tell your men to let us pass." Julian walked slowly down the gangway. He stopped one step above Liam, forcing the younger man to look up at him. Julian's eyes were a deep Arctic blue. "Mr. Liam," Julian paused as if searching for a last name. "Ah, yes. The analyst from Sterling Price, the one with the creative expense reports." Liam froze. The blood drained from his face. I don't know what you're talking about." "I'm sure you don't," Julian said coolly. He looked past Liam, his gaze falling on Harrison Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, you are trespassing. Your presence and the presence of your associate is not welcome." "Now you see here," Harrison bellowed. "Who in the hell do you think you are talking to me like that? We are guests." "No," Julian said. "You are not." "Liam!" Serafina shrieked, her face turning an ugly shade of red. "Fix this! You promised! Emily!" Liam shouted desperately, playing his last card. "I am married to Emily Thorne. She's his daughter. Tell him." Julian's thin smile returned. "Mr. Thorne has no daughter named Emily Thorne. You are mistaken." Liam's world tilted. A lie. Had Emily been lying to him all this time? Was this whole thing a... He is, however, expecting his daughter. Julian looked back up at the yacht, and her timing, as always, is impeccable. A black Rolls-Royce Cullinan one Liam had seen on the tarmac just last night, he now realized had pulled up silently behind the security checkpoint. The security team snapped to attention, forming two lines. The rear door of the Rolls-Royce opened. A man stepped out first. He was in his mid-60s, with a shock of silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore a simple dark blue polo shirt and linen trousers, but he radiated an power so potent it was almost a physical force. He was unmistakably Marcus Thorne. Harrison Sterling stopped yelling. He looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. Mr. Thorne, he stammered. Marcus Thorne ignored him. He ignored them all. He simply turned and extended his hand to the passenger still inside the car. "Are you ready, my dear?" His voice, a deep baritone, carried easily on the breeze. A woman's hand took his. It was slender, pale, and adorned with a simple, blindingly large, cushion-cut diamond ring that Liam had never seen before. A moment later she emerged. She stepped out of the Rolls-Royce and into the sunlight, and Liam's mind simply broke. It was Emily. But it was not Emily. This was not the mousy librarian in the pilled cardigan. This woman was a supernova. Her hair was a rich, shining cascade of chestnut waves. She wore a sophisticated cream-colored St. John knit dress that hugged her body and a pair of Manolo Blahnik heels. Around her neck was a simple, elegant Graf diamond pendant. Her face was the same, but the expression was one Liam had never seen. It was a look of complete, effortless, and devastating authority. She was, in a word, magnificent. "Emily," Liam breathed. It was a question, a plea, a gasp. Serafina, standing next to him, let out a sound of pure, venomous disbelief. "Liam, who? Who is that? Is that your wife?" She laughed, a high, nervous sound. "What is this, a costume? Did she follow you here? How pathetic." Emily's gaze, cool and appraising, swept over the group. It lingered for a second on Harrison. Sterling dismissed Serafina with a glance, and then finally it settled on her husband. She looked at him. She saw his fake tan, his rented suit, his slack-jawed expression of utter shock. She saw Serafina's hand, which was still clutching his arm possessively. She didn't look angry. She didn't look hurt. She looked, to Liam's horror, bored. She turned away from him and smiled at the billionaire beside her. "Shall we, father?" she asked. The word hit the dock like a bomb. "Father." Liam's legs gave out. He physically stumbled, catching himself on the velvet rope. "Father." Harrison Sterling went white as a sheet. "Thorne, your daughter." Marcus Thorne, who had not yet acknowledged any of them, put a protective, loving arm around Emily's waist. He then turned his head, and his eyes, as cold and deep as the ocean behind him, pinned Liam to the spot. "So." Marcus Thorne's voice was quiet, but it vibrated with absolute power. "This is the man who finds my daughter ordinary. This is the man who told her she wouldn't fit in." Liam couldn't breathe. The air had been stolen from his lungs. "Emily? You work at a library." "Yes, I do," Emily said. Her voice. It was her voice, the one from the phone call. The voice of command. "I chair the board of the Thorne Family Philanthropic Foundation. Our largest project is the Global Literacy Initiative. We've funded and built over 500 libraries worldwide. I was quite literally at the library. I just failed to specify which one." She took a step toward him. "You're right, Liam. I am a woman of simple tastes. I wanted a simple life. I wanted to be loved for me, Emily Brown, my mother's name. I wanted a partner, a man who loved me, for my mind, not my inheritance." Her eyes flicked to Serafina. "But it seems I chose a man who is only interested in what he can acquire. And when he found out I was a non-performing asset, he went looking for a hostile takeover." Serafina, finally understanding the catastrophic, career-ending social suicide bomb, She had just strapped herself to recoiled from Liam as if he were radioactive. "Liam!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. You lied to me. You told me she was a nobody. You're married to Emily Thorne." Harrison Sterling looked like he was about to have a coronary. He rounded on Liam. You idiot. You absolute categorical fool. You were cheating on Marcus Thorne's daughter with mine. You've ruined me. You've ruined this firm. No. Wait. Liam panicked, reaching for Emily. "Emily. Baby, please, it's not what it looks like. I love you, I always have. This was just networking." Emily didn't flinch. She just looked at his outstretched hand with utter disgust. "Networking." She repeated the word, an icicle. "Is that what you call it? Or is it streamlining your personal portfolio?" Liam's hand dropped. He had been found out, completely. "But it's so much worse than that. Isn't it, Liam?" Emily continued, her voice rising, drawing the attention of other nearby yacht owners. "You didn't just cheat on me. You're a thief." "A thief?" Liam stammered, his mind racing. "What are you talking about? I've never stolen anything in my life." "Emily, you're upset, I get it, but don't make up. $827,400, Julian Alastair said, stepping forward. He was holding a slim leather-bound file. "Funneled from Sterling Price expense accounts into a shell corporation, LGH Solutions, registered in Delaware, a corporation for which you are the sole signatory." Harrison Sterling's head snapped toward Liam. "LGH? My God. That's been flagged by audit for months." And then, Julian continued, his voice relentless, "There is the matter of the Apex Tech merger. You used your privileged access to download the full due diligence packet. My team tracked your digital footprint. You've been attempting to sell that data to Apex's primary competitor, Cygnus Dynamics, for a personal payout of $5 million. If Harrison Sterling had been white before, he was now translucent. "Industrial. Espionage. You worm. You didn't just cheat on a Thorne, you did it while stealing from me." "Mr. Sterling." Marcus Thorne finally spoke, his voice a low growl. "Your firm's catastrophic lack of security and your daughter's appalling lack of judgment in cavorting with this creature has made you a liability. As of this morning, the Thorne Consolidated Fund has divested its entire $2.2 billion stake in Sterling Price. I suggest you check your stock ticker. It's going to be a difficult Monday." Harrison grabbed his phone. His thumb swiped frantically. He saw the after-hours trading alert. The stock was in free fall. It was a complete wipeout. You're ruined," Serafina whispered, staring at Liam, her face a mask of horror. You ruined my father." "Emily." Liam was on his knees now, a desperate, broken man. He grabbed the hem of her dress. "Emily, please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I love you. I swear I love you. It was a mistake. Don't do this." Emily looked down at the man sobbing at her feet. The man who had criticized her clothes, mocked her job, and dismissed her as simple. The man who had lied to her every single day of their marriage. She pulled her dress from his grasp, her face cold as marble. "You're right about one thing, Liam," she said. "You didn't know. You never bothered to know me at all. You saw a quiet woman, and you assumed she was weak. You saw a simple life, and you assumed it was a small one." She bent down slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. You were sleeping next to the single most powerful heiress on this continent, and you traded her for a socialite. You were given the keys to a kingdom, and you chose instead to steal the petty cash from the till. You are not a shark, Liam. You're just a bottom feeder. And you're done. She stood up. Julian, she said, her voice ringing out in the clear air. Ensure Mr. Sterling, Miss Sterling, and him are removed from the premises. They are no longer welcome in Newport. With pleasure, madam. The security guards stepped forward. They didn't touch Emily or her family. They moved past them, grabbing Liam by the arms. No, Emily! Emily! He screamed, his rented suit tearing as he struggled. Get your hands off me! Harrison Sterling bellowed, but another guard was already firmly escorting him, and a sobbing Serafina back down the dock. Emily didn't watch. She had already turned her back. Marcus Thorne put his arm around his daughter's shoulder and guided her up the gangway. Welcome home, Emily. It's good to be home, Father, she whispered. Liam was dragged, kicking and screaming down the dock, past the rows of billionaires and socialites, who were now all watching him, their faces a mixture of pity and contempt. He was a nobody. Worse than a nobody, he was a fool. The last thing he saw before he was thrown out onto the street was Emily. She was standing on the aft deck of the Vanguard, a glass of champagne in her hand, looking out at the ocean. She didn't look back. Not once. The super yacht's horn sounded a low, powerful blast as it prepared to detach from the dock and sail away, leaving him in its wake. The fallout was not just immediate. It was biblical. Before the Vanguard had even cleared the Newport harbor, the story was everywhere. It wasn't just gossip. It was a financial earthquake. Forbes and the Wall Street Journal had competing headlines. Sterling price in freefall after Thorne divestment, and the billion-dollar betrayal. Marcus Thorne's secret heiress revealed. Harrison Sterling's firm was eviscerated. The stock cratered by 80% before the SEC halted trading. He was facing shareholder lawsuits that would strip him of everything he had. Serafina, once the queen of the social scene, became a pariah overnight. Her friends wouldn't take her calls. Vogue pulled her upcoming feature. She was in the language of her world, cancelled. But for Liam, the reckoning was far more personal. He was arrested at the Hotel Viking before he'd even finished packing. The police didn't knock. They kicked the door in. The charges filed by both Sterling Price in a desperate bid to distance themselves and the U.S. Attorney's office were read out in the hallway. 12 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of embezzlement, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. His new Amex card was declined. His secret bank account in Delaware was frozen. He had to use a public defender. He tried to call Emily from his one phone call. The number was, of course, disconnected. He sat in a cold, concrete cell, the smell of bleach and despair filling his lungs. He kept replaying the scene on the dock, the way she had looked, the power, the coldness. It wasn't just that he had lost her. It was the horrifying realization that he had never even known her. His entire marriage had been a test of his character, his loyalty, his love, and he had failed on every conceivable level. He thought back to all the little things. The community college she'd gone to, which he now realized was a casual reference to Stanford, where she'd gotten her MBA. The old family friend, she'd mentioned Julian, who was one of the most powerful financial managers in the world. The simple jewelry she wore, which he now understood was likely antique, priceless, and worn for sentiment, not for show. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant, greedy fool. He'd had a winning lottery ticket in his hand for 5 years and had thrown it away because he was too busy trying to steal a scratch off. The divorce papers arrived 2 days later, delivered by a high-powered attorney from a white shoe law firm. There was no negotiation. He was charged with adultery and financial malfeasance against his own marital estate. He would get nothing, less than nothing. His legal fees for the criminal trial would ensure he was in debt for the rest of his life. The trial was short. The evidence meticulously compiled by Julian's team was airtight. The digital footprint, the bank transfers, the saved texts to Serafina, promising to ditch the simpleton wife as soon as he got his promotion. The judge, a woman who seemed to have a particular distaste for men who betrayed their wives, made an example of him. "You had everything," she said, her voice echoing in the courtroom. "A wife who by all accounts was loyal and loving. A good job, a bright future, and you threw it all away out of pure, unadulterated greed. You are not just a criminal, Mr. Liam. You are a man of profound moral emptiness." He was sentenced to 7 years in a federal minimum security prison. As he was led out in handcuffs, he saw a copy of a magazine on a reporter's lap. It was the new Forbes. The cover wasn't of his downfall. It was of her. A stunning professional photograph of Emily Thorne standing in a field in a developing country, surrounded by smiling children. The headline, "The Quiet Billionaire, Emily Thorne's $10 plan to educate the world." She hadn't just taken back her name. She had taken back her life. And in doing so, she had utterly and completely erased his. 1 year later. The Vanguard cut a silent silver line through the impossible cobalt of the Mediterranean Sea. The sun was a melting ball of orange, bleeding into the horizon off the coast of Sardinia. On the aft deck, Emily stood alone, leaning against the teak railing. She was not in a couture gown. She wore a simple cream Ecuadorian cotton shirt and linen trousers. Her hair pulled back into the same functional simple ponytail she had always favored. To a passing glance, she was the same woman who had wiped counters and hummed in a small beige apartment. But she was not the same. She would never be the same. The hesitation was gone. The practiced mask of meekness had been burned away in the fire of her husband's trial and the public glare that followed. She had been on magazine covers in boardrooms and on podiums in developing nations. She wore her identity now not as a burden to be hidden, but as a tool to be wielded. The quiet was still part of her, but it was no longer the quiet of a mouse. It was the quiet of the ocean's deep. "You'll stare a hole in that sunset, my dear." Marcus Thorne walked onto the deck, holding 2 tall glasses of iced tea, lemon slices clinking against the glass. He handed one to her, his eyes so like hers, crinkling at the corners. He, too, was in simple attire. The truly powerful she had learned never needed to advertise. "I was just thinking, Father," she said, her voice carrying easily on the warm breeze. "About him?" Marcus asked. His voice was gentle, but with a hard edge like velvet laid over granite. "He's not worth the space in your thoughts, Emily." "Not about him precisely," Emily corrected, turning to face the water. "I was thinking about me, the woman I was. I was so terrified of this." She motioned around her at the floating palace, the invisible, ever-present security, the weight of the name Thorne. "I was so afraid it would poison any chance at real love, that no one would ever see me, just the inheritance." She took a sip. "So I ran. I hid inside a simple life, and in my desperate attempt to avoid a man who would only want me for my money, I attracted the only thing worse, a man who despised me for not having it. Marcus was silent for a long moment, watching his daughter. "You gave him a rare gift, Emily," he said finally, his voice rumbling with pride. "You gave him the chance to love you for your character alone. You gave him a test without either of you ever knowing it was a test. He saw a priceless diamond lying on the sand, and because it wasn't in a velvet box, he declared it to be common glass and threw it away. That is a failure of his vision, not of your worth." He smiled a rare, full smile. He was a man of shallow appetites. He wanted a trophy. He just had no idea the one he had was the grand prize. He was looking for glitter, and he couldn't recognize gold. A third figure approached, as silent as a shadow. It was Julian, tablet in hand. "Madame," he said, his voice the epitome of professional calm, "your 10 o'clock with the Ghanaian Minister of Education is confirmed, and as you requested the final update on the associated parties." Emily straightened her focus, shifting instantly from reflective to decisive. "Go ahead, Julian." Liam's first parole hearing was denied as expected. Our legal observers noted he seemed unwell. He will serve his full 7-year term. Harrison Sterling's final appeal against the firm's bankruptcy was rejected. The bank has seized his last remaining property, the condo in Palm Beach. He is, I'm told, living with his sister in Ohio. "And Serafina?" Emily asked, her voice devoid of malice, purely curious. A flicker of something, perhaps distaste, crossed Julian's face. After a failed attempt to rebrand as a lifestyle influencer in Dubai, Miss Sterling was last seen auditioning for a C-list reality television show called Billionaire Bachelorettes. She was not cast. A simple, pathetic end. A life built on presentation collapsing when the presentation was no longer welcome. Emily nodded, a small, sad sigh escaping her. The sheer ugly waste of it all. She turned her focus to what mattered. "And the community center in Montana, the one I funded with the proceeds from the apartment." She had sold the home she and Liam had shared, and every penny of her half had gone into a new foundation. Julian permitted himself a small, genuine smile. The Emily Thorne Literacy Center is fully operational. It's serving over 300 families in the region. The governor sends his personal thanks and invites you to the formal opening. "I'll be there," Emily said. "Thank you, Julian." He bowed slightly and disappeared. Marcus Thorne put his arm around his daughter's shoulder. "You took the rubble of his betrayal and you built a library. You didn't just take back your name, Emily. You elevated it. You are not just my legacy. You're better than I am. I built an empire on acquiring. You're building one on giving back." Emily leaned her head on her father's shoulder, closing her eyes as the last sliver of sun vanished, leaving the sky a deep, peaceful purple. She was whole. Thousands of miles away, the same sunset was invisible. A loud, clanging bell signaled lights out. Liam sat on the edge of a thin, vinyl-covered mattress in a cell that smelled of stale sweat and industrial bleach. He was thinner, paler, his Breitling watch long gone, replaced by a raw red mark on his wrist that had faded months ago. The arrogance in his eyes was gone, hollowed out, and replaced by a dull, constant thrum of humiliation. Taped to the grey concrete wall above his small metal desk, pasted in from a contraband magazine, was a picture. It was the Forbes cover. Her, Emily. Not in a gown, but in a simple blue button-down shirt, standing in a field, smiling at a child who was holding a book. Her hair was in a ponytail. She looked happy. She looked powerful. She looked, he realized, with a sickening lurch, exactly as she had looked when she was making him coffee. The power had always been there. He just hadn't been able to see it. His cellmate, a disgraced accountant, was already asleep. In the dark, Liam stared at the image. He remembered her words. "I like my work at the city library." He had scoffed. He'd mocked her. He remembered her simple pilled cardigan. He'd told her she was an embarrassment. He had been given a queen, and he had treated her like a servant. Not because she was good at hiding, he finally agonizingly understood, but because he had the mind of a servant, one who could only recognize value when it was loud, glittering, and announced by others. He thought he was a shark in a world of minnows. But he had just been a loud, small-minded fool blind to the quiet, true greatness beside him. He hadn't just thought she was ordinary. He had been the ordinary one, and in her world, he was the one who, in the end, simply didn't fit in. And so Liam learned the hardest lesson of all: never ever judge a book by its cover. He thought he was marrying a simple librarian, but he had married a queen in disguise. He wanted power, but he was too blind to see he already had it. By chasing the glitter of Newport, he lost the gold that was waiting for him at home. Karma, as they say, has a way of paying every debt in full. What did you think of Emily's story? Was Liam's downfall deserved, or was he just a man caught in a world too big for him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. This is the kind of drama that happens in real life, even if it seems like a movie. If you love stories about karma, hidden identities, and a satisfying reckoning, then you have found the right channel. Please hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe and ring the bell. We have so many more stories to tell, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thank you for listening. He stood at the pinnacle of his world, a king in a glass tower, overlooking a city that bowed to his wealth. He had it all, a billion-dollar company, a name that commanded respect, and a beautiful wife carrying his first child. But in a single brutal moment, the gleam of ambition in his eyes turned to poison. He made a choice, trading his family for a bigger fortune, throwing his pregnant wife out into the cold, unforgiving night. He believed he was untouchable. He never imagined that her quiet, unassuming father was the one man on earth who could dismantle his entire empire with nothing more than a keyboard and a lifetime of silent promises. This is the story of how a titan of industry was brought to his knees not by a rival, but by a father's love, and forced to bow before the family he tried to destroy. Ethan Blackwood loved the view from his penthouse. It was a conqueror's view. From the 63rd floor, the city of Seattle sprawled below a tapestry of glittering lights and crawling traffic. Every pinprick of light representing a life he had in some small way surpassed. His company, Blackwood Capital, was a leviathan in the world of high-frequency trading, a machine of his own design that devoured market inefficiencies and spat out obscene profits. At 34, he was the self-made king of a digital empire, and his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass was that of a man who had never known failure. His wife, Clara, was the perfect complement to his steel-edged ambition. She was the soft grace to his hard angles, an artist whose gentle spirit seemed to soothe the frantic, predatory energy that always thrummed just beneath his skin. They had met 3 years prior at a charity gala. He was there to network a shark in a tuxedo, and she was there because her latest painting had been donated for the auction. He'd been captivated not by her beauty alone, but by her utter lack of artifice. She didn't know who he was, and when he told her, she wasn't impressed by the money, but curious about the mind that built the machine. Their life was a meticulously curated dream. Dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, spontaneous trips to Paris on the private jet, a home filled with priceless art and minimalist furniture. Yet for Clara, the penthouse sometimes felt less like a home and more like a beautiful, sterile museum. Ethan was often distant, his mind 1,000 miles away, lost in the cascading numbers and algorithms that were his true passion. She loved him deeply, but she loved the man she saw in rare, unguarded moments, the one who would watch old movies with her, his head in her lap, or the one who truly listened as she described the colors of a sunset. The news of her pregnancy was supposed to be the final, perfect piece of their life. When she told him, placing his hand on her still, flat stomach, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes she couldn't decipher. It wasn't the pure, unadulterated joy she had expected. It was more complex, like a master strategist recalculating variables on a battlefield. "A son?" He'd said, his voice a low hum. "A Blackwood heir, to carry on the name." It wasn't "our baby" or "I'm so happy." It was about legacy, about an asset. The coldness of it was a tiny splinter in her heart, one she tried desperately to ignore. The distance between them grew in the following months. Ethan was working on the biggest deal of his career, a hostile takeover of Sterling Industries, a much older, more established tech firm, run by the formidable Harrison Sterling. It was a brutal, bloody corporate war, and Ethan was consumed by it. He came home later, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity, the scent of coffee and ozone clinging to his clothes. Clara, now 4 months pregnant, and starting to show, tried to be the supportive wife. She made sure his favorite single malt was waiting. She ran him baths. She tried to talk to him about names for the baby, about turning one of the spare rooms into a nursery. "Not now, Clara." He'd snap his gaze, fixed on the multiple monitors in his home office. "This Sterling deal is everything. Do you have any idea what this means?" She didn't, not really. She just knew it was taking her husband from her. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Ethan came home early, which was unusual. He didn't look tired. He looked energized, electric. There was a cruel, triumphant smirk on his face she hadn't seen before. "I did it," he announced, shrugging off his $1,000 coat and tossing it onto a chair. "I broke him. Harrison Sterling is finished." "Ethan, that's..." "Good," she said, confused by his tone. "It's better than good. It's magnificent," he said, pouring himself a drink. He turned to her, and his eyes were cold, assessing. "Clara, we need to talk." The splinter in her heart twisted. "Okay," she said, her hand instinctively going to her belly. He took a long swallow of his drink before speaking. "The terms of the final acquisition are delicate. Harrison is a proud man. To make this work, to merge our companies and create a true global powerhouse, certain alliances must be made." "Alliances? What do you mean?" He walked over to the window, his back to her. "Harrison has a daughter, Isabella Sterling. She's brilliant, ruthless. She's been running their European division. She's a partner, in the truest sense of the word." A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into Clara's veins. "Ethan, what are you saying?" He turned around, and any trace of the man she loved was gone. In his place was a stranger, a predator, who had just closed in on his prey. The deal is contingent on a merger of families as well as companies. A marriage between me and Isabella. It solidifies the empire. It's the final move on the chessboard. The world tilted. The crystal glass of water in her hand slipped and shattered on the polished marble floor. A marriage, Ethan, you're married to me. We're having a baby. Her voice was a choked whisper. That, he said, gesturing dismissively at her stomach, is a complication, an unfortunate variable. The cruelty of his words was like a physical blow. A complication. This is your child. It's a problem I can solve with money, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. I will set you up, you and the child. You'll have an apartment, a generous trust fund. You'll want for nothing. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, of course. To everyone, our marriage simply didn't work out. Amicable split. Tears were streaming down her face, now hot and furious. You think you can buy your child? You think you can just erase us because we're no longer convenient for your business deal? Who are you? I am the man who is offering you a comfortable life, he said, his patience thinning. This is a much better deal than you'd get from any divorce court. I'm being generous. Generous, she shrieked, the sound raw and broken. You're a monster. His face hardened into a mask of pure, chilling indifference. I am a realist. This is the world I operate in. Love, sentiment. They are luxuries, Clara. Liabilities. I am building an empire, and an empire requires sacrifice. Isabella understands that. You, with your paintings and your feelings, you were a pleasant diversion. But the game has changed. He walked to the bedroom and came back with her suitcase, the one she used for weekend trips. He opened it on the floor. Pack your things, he said. The doorman will call you a car. I want you out of here tonight. She stared at him, at the suitcase, at the shattered pieces of glass and the shattered pieces of her life on the floor. Ethan, please, she begged, one last desperate appeal. Don't do this. Think about our baby. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for a second she thought she saw a flicker of doubt. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by an iron resolve. The deal with Sterling closes in a month. Isabella is already flying in. You need to be gone, he stated, as if discussing a line item on a balance sheet. The choice is simple, Clara. Leave with the money and your dignity, or be thrown out with nothing. But either way, you are leaving. The love she had for him curdled into something bitter and cold. The man she had married was a ghost, a fiction she had created in her own mind. This man, this creature of pure, unadulterated greed, was the reality. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she stopped crying. She squared her shoulders and looked him dead in the eye. I don't want your money, Ethan. I don't want anything from you. She turned, walked into the bedroom, and packed not her expensive clothes or jewelry, but the few things that truly mattered: a photo of her parents, a book of poetry her mother had given her, and the first ultrasound picture of their baby. When she came back out, he was on his phone already talking business, his voice sharp and commanding. He didn't even look up as she walked past him, her suitcase rolling softly on the marble floor. As she waited for the elevator, the cold reality hit her. She was 4 months pregnant, homeless, and her life had just been liquidated like a failing stock. And the man she once promised to love for eternity hadn't even had the decency to say goodbye. The taxi ride felt like a descent into a different reality. The gleaming skyscrapers of downtown Seattle, once symbols of a shared future, now seemed to mock her, their lights cold and alien. Each drop of rain that slid down the window was a tear for the life that had just been so clinically excised. The driver, a kind-faced man named George, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with concern. He had asked, "Where to, ma'am?" And all she could whisper was an address in Bainbridge Island, an address she hadn't called home in years. The ferry ride across Puget Sound was a blur of mist and sorrow. Clara stood on the deck, the cold, salty wind whipping at her face, pulling her coat tighter around her pregnant belly. It was as if she was crossing a Stygian river, leaving the land of the living, or at least the world of Ethan Blackwood, behind. She was heading home. Her parents, Robert and Mary Thompson, lived in a modest, cedar-shingled house nestled amongst pine trees overlooking the water. It was the house she grew up in, a place of warmth, worn wooden floors, and the constant smell of her mother's baking, and the faint, clean scent of her father's workshop. When the taxi pulled up the gravel driveway, the porch light was already on, casting a warm, welcoming glow. Her mother Mary must have been watching from the window. The front door flew open before Clara had even paid the driver. Mary Thompson was a woman whose kindness was etched into the lines around her eyes. She took one look at her daughter's pale, tear-streaked face and the single suitcase, and her expression shifted from confusion to a fierce, maternal understanding. "Oh, my baby," she whispered, wrapping Clara in a hug that smelled of cinnamon and home. Clara collapsed into her mother's arms, the carefully constructed dam of her composure finally breaking, and she sobbed long and raggedly. Inside, her father, Robert Thompson, was standing by the fireplace. He was a tall, quiet man, a retired software architect whose gentle demeanor belied a mind of formidable intellect. He was a man of few words, but his presence was a bedrock. He took her suitcase from her hand, his large, calloused hand briefly squeezing hers. It was all the comfort he needed to offer. She knew he was there. Over hot tea and toast that Clara couldn't eat, she told them everything. The words tumbled out in a broken, agonizing stream: the sterling deal, Isabella; the cold, transactional way Ethan had dismissed her and their unborn child. She spoke of the ultimatum, the suitcase, the utter finality in his eyes. Mary listened, her face a mask of grief and fury, tears welling in her own eyes. Robert, however, was unnervingly still. He sat in his old leather armchair, his hands steepled under his chin, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth. He didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. He just listened, absorbing every single painful detail. The silence from him was more profound than any shout could have been. When Clara finished, her voice raw and hoarse, Mary was the first to speak. That monster. I will call a lawyer first thing in the morning. We will fight him. He will not get away with this." Clara shook her head, feeling utterly defeated. "What's the point, Mum? He has a team of the best lawyers in the country. He'll bury us in legal fees. He said he would. He'll paint me as a gold digger and drag my name through the mud. I can't." Robert finally moved. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and his eyes, when they met Clara's, were not filled with pity but with a calm, analytical fire. "Did he threaten you?" he asked, his voice low and even. "Not physically," Clara said. "He just made it clear. I was an obstacle to be removed, that I should take the money and disappear quietly for my own good." "And you have this in writing? Any emails, texts?" "No," she whispered. He was too smart for that. It was all in person, in our home. Robert nodded slowly, his mind clearly working, processing the information like lines of code. He looked at her belly, then back at her face. "You are safe here," he said. It wasn't a platitude. It was a statement of absolute fact. "You and your child will have everything you need. This is your home. You will not worry about money. You will not worry about Ethan Blackwood." Later that night, tucked into her childhood bed, the familiar scent of lavender from her mother's garden drifting through the window, Clara felt a fragile sense of safety. But beneath it, a current of fear still ran deep. Ethan wasn't just a man. He was a force of nature in his world. He crushed his enemies. What was to stop him from crushing her just to be thorough? She drifted into a troubled sleep and woke hours later thirsty. As she padded down the hallway, she saw a light on in her father's study. The door was slightly ajar. Peeking in, she saw him sitting in front of a complex multi-monitor computer setup, a system far more advanced than anything a typical retiree would own. The screen was filled with flowing lines of code market data streams and complex network architecture diagrams. He wasn't looking at family photos or reading the news. He was working. His fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. On one screen, she saw the corporate structure of Blackwood Capital. On another, a deep-dive analysis of its core trading algorithms. Clara had always known her father was brilliant. In the 90s, he had been a legendary, albeit reclusive figure in the nascent world of fintech. He'd designed some of the foundational security protocols and trading architectures that the modern financial system was built upon, then abruptly retired in his late 40s, claiming he wanted a simpler life, away from the vultures of Wall Street. He'd cashed out his patents for a comfortable but not extravagant sum, and never looked back. Ethan had always dismissed him as Clara's quiet dad, the retired crypt monkey. He had no idea who Robert Thompson really was. No one did, except a very small, very powerful circle of old-school tech pioneers. Watching him now, Clara understood. Her quiet, gentle father was not just looking at data. He was mapping out a battlefield. He was sharpening weapons she couldn't comprehend. The stillness she had seen earlier was not resignation. It was the deep, focused calm of a grand master contemplating a chessboard, seeing not just the next move, but the entire game 20 moves ahead. He wasn't going to call a lawyer. He was going to war. A strange sense of peace settled over Clara. The fear didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else, a sliver of awe. Ethan Blackwood had built his empire on code and algorithms. He had just made a mortal enemy of the man who had written the language. Ethan Blackwood felt invincible. With Clara gone, a sentimental weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The penthouse, once softened by her presence, was now exactly as he liked it, a pristine, silent monument to his success. There were no more gentle questions about his day, no more talk of nurseries or baby names. There was only the clean, exhilarating hum of ambition. Isabella Sterling arrived from London 2 days later. She was everything Clara was not. Where Clara was warm, Isabella was polished steel. She was sharp, impossibly chic, with an analytical mind that mirrored Ethan's own. They didn't speak of love. They spoke of synergy, of market share, of consolidating power. Their relationship was a merger, a strategic alliance, and the chemistry between them was born not of passion, but of a shared, ravenous hunger for dominance. "Your ex-wife," Isabella said on her first night in the penthouse, swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux. "Was she a problem?" "She was at a loose end," Ethan replied, not looking up from a tablet displaying market projections. "I've tied it. No legal complications, no emotional attachments." I made her a financial offer she couldn't refuse. He lied smoothly. She's pragmatic. She took the money and is looking for a fresh start. He saw no need to tell Isabella about the pregnancy. It was an irrelevant data point, a variable he had already contained. To mention it would be to show weakness, a crack in his perfect, calculated facade. Their days became a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, bankers, and PR firms. The merger of Blackwood Capital and Sterling Industries was being heralded in the financial press as the deal of the decade. Ethan Blackwood, the wunderkind of algorithmic trading, joins forces with the Sterling dynasty to create a new global tech titan, Sterling Blackwood. His face was on the cover of Forbes, his name spoken with reverence on cable news. He was no longer just rich. He was becoming a legacy. He completely forgot about Clara and her quiet father. They were a footnote from a previous chapter, irrelevant to the epic he was now writing. He'd had his assistant David wire a one-time severance of $500,000 to Clara's old bank account, an account he assumed she'd empty immediately. When the wire was returned a week later, marked refused, he felt a flicker of annoyance, not concern. "Stubborn," he muttered to David. "Fine, her loss. Let her see what it's like in the real world without my safety net." David Hayes, a young, fiercely intelligent analyst who had been with Ethan from the beginning, looked uneasy. "Sir, are you sure about this, I mean? Her family is a retired programmer from some island," Ethan scoffed. "What are they going to do?" "Send me a strongly worded email. Focus on the Sterling integration." David, that's all that matters. But David, who had always admired Clara's kindness, felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. He had seen the returned wire transfer. It wasn't just a refusal. It was a statement. Meanwhile, on Bainbridge Island, Robert Thompson was not writing emails. He was activating a network not of lawyers, but of legends. His first call was to a man named Julian Ghost Vance, a cybersecurity savant living in a remote cabin in Utah. Julian owed his entire career to Robert, who had mentored him as a teenager and kept him out of federal prison. "Robert," Julian's voice crackled over the encrypted line. "It's been a decade. I thought you'd fallen off the earth." "I need a ghost in a machine, Julian," Robert said, his voice calm and steady. "A very specific machine. Blackwood Capital. Blackwood, the HFT Golden Boy. That place is a fortress. Their security architecture is top of the line." "I know," Robert said. "I designed the core principles it's based on 20 years ago, and I know the flaws I never bothered to publish." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. "Oh, this is going to be fun. What do you need, old man? I don't want you to steal anything. I don't want you to break anything," Robert instructed. "I just want you to watch. I want to know every trade, every algorithm shift, every data packet that moves in and out of their servers. I want you to whisper in their wires." His next call was to an old colleague, a mathematics professor at MIT named Dr. Aris Thorne, a man who could see patterns in chaos that no one else could. "Aris," Robert said, "I'm sending you a data packet. It contains the trading philosophy of a certain firm. I need you to build a counter-rhythm, a model that doesn't defeat it but harmonizes with it in a way that introduces subtle discord." His third call was to a woman on the board of the largest pension fund in California, a woman he had tutored in quantitative analysis when she was just a struggling graduate student. He didn't ask for a favor. He simply advised her as an old friend to review the risk profile of her fund's exposure to newer aggressive HFT firms, particularly those with a single point of leadership. He was not gathering an army to lay siege to Ethan's castle. He was gathering termites, a quiet, invisible force that would chew away at the foundations until the entire gleaming structure was ready to collapse at the slightest push. He worked silently mostly at night while Clara slept, and Mary worried. He was a patient man, playing a very long game. He knew that to destroy a man like Ethan Blackwood, you didn't attack his money directly. You attacked his reputation, his genius, his very sanity. You made the machine he trusted above all else begin to lie to him. Back in Seattle, Ethan was celebrating. He and Isabella hosted a lavish party at the penthouse to announce their engagement and the finalization of the merger. The great and the good of the city were there, champagne flowed, and Ethan stood beside his new partner, feeling the immense intoxicating power of their combined influence. He raised a glass to the crowd. "To the future," he declared, his voice ringing with triumph. "To Sterling Blackwood, an empire built not on bricks and mortar, but on speed, intelligence, and a relentless vision." As the guests applauded, his phone buzzed. It was a priority alert from his head of operations. He glanced at it, a slight frown touching his lips. Subject: minor algorithmic drift, Alpha 7. Message seeing fractional percentage underperformance on the A7 algo. Probably market noise. Monitoring. Ethan dismissed it with a flick of his thumb. Market noise. An irrelevant data point. He put the phone back in his pocket and smiled at Isabella, oblivious to the fact that the first termite had just taken its first bite. The first week after the party, the minor algorithmic drift was just that, a whisper in the data streams. Ethan's lead quant, a jittery genius named Ben, assured him it was statistical noise. "The markets are volatile post-merger announcement, Ethan. It's just the system recalibrating. It'll smooth out." Ethan accepted the explanation. His Alpha 7 algorithm was his masterpiece, a complex piece of code that analyzed microsecond market fluctuations to execute thousands of trades per second. It had never failed him. The idea that it could be flawed was tantamount to questioning a law of physics. But the drift didn't smooth out. By the end of the second week, the fractional underperformance had become a consistent, albeit tiny, loss. It was like a slow leak in the engine of a Formula One car, not enough to stop it, but just enough to lose the race by a millisecond. In the world of high-frequency trading, a millisecond was an eternity. "Run a full diagnostic," Ethan commanded, his voice tight with irritation. "Strip the code down to its foundation and rebuild it. I want a report by morning." Ben and his team worked for 36 hours straight, fueled by caffeine and fear. The report landed on Ethan's desk with a thud. "We can't find anything," Ben said, his face pale, dark circles under his eyes. "The code is perfect. The hardware is running at peak efficiency. There are no bugs, no breaches, no intrusions. On paper, it should be performing 5% better than it is." "That's not possible," Ethan snapped, throwing the report onto his desk. "Machines don't lie. Find it." This was Robert Thompson's first move, executed by Dr. Aris Thorne. The counter-rhythm wasn't an attack. It was a subtle form of financial aikido. It introduced a series of infinitesimally small, perfectly legal trades into the market that mimicked the behavior of Alpha 7, but were designed to resolve a fraction of a microsecond earlier. It was like a shadow that arrived just before the person casting it. The result was that Alpha 7 was constantly arriving a moment too late, buying a fraction of a cent too high, selling a fraction too low. The losses were tiny on each trade, but multiplied by millions of trades a day, they began to add up. It was an elegant, undetectable drain on Blackwood Capital's lifeblood. Ethan grew obsessed. He started spending his nights in the office, staring at walls of cascading data, trying to spot the ghost in his machine. He became irritable and paranoid, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. "Perhaps you're too close to it," Isabella suggested coolly one evening, as he ignored the gourmet meal she'd had catered. "You've been focused on this merger. Maybe you should let your team handle it." "My team can't see what I see," he retorted, his eyes never leaving the screen. "They're builders. I'm an architect. Something is wrong with the foundation." Then the second cut came. This one was executed by Julian "Ghost" Vance. Following Robert's instructions, Julian didn't hack the system. Instead, he exploited a long-forgotten backdoor in the server's firmware, a backdoor Robert himself had built 2 decades earlier for diagnostic purposes. He didn't steal data. He did something far more insidious. He slightly, almost imperceptibly, desynchronized the timestamps on a single random data server for a few nanoseconds every hour. The result was chaos masquerading as normalcy. A trade that was executed at 10:01 a.m. might be recorded as 10:04 a.m. To a human, it was meaningless. To a high-frequency trading algorithm that lived and died in the world of nanoseconds, it was catastrophic. It made the data untrustworthy. The system began to second-guess itself, creating micro-hesitations that led to missed opportunities. Ethan's profits, once a mighty river, were now a stream, and the stream was dwindling. He started lashing out, accusing his own people of incompetence or, worse, sabotage. "Someone in this room is leaking information," he roared during one tense board meeting, his eyes scanning the faces of his most trusted lieutenants. "Our strategies are being front-run. There is no other explanation." The paranoia began to infect the company culture. The collaborative energy that had fueled their rise was replaced by suspicion and fear. David Hayes watched his boss, the man he had once idolized, transform into a tyrant, haunted by a phantom he couldn't see. The third cut was the most subtle and perhaps the most brilliant. Robert, using a pseudonym, wrote a highly technical white paper titled "Quantum Entanglement and Systemic Risk in Latency Arbitrage Models." It was a dense academic paper that he seeded onto obscure forums and university servers frequented by top-level quants and financial analysts. The paper didn't mention Blackwood Capital by name. It simply posited a theoretical vulnerability in the exact type of proprietary architecture Ethan used. It argued that such systems, in their relentless pursuit of speed, had created a structural fragility so profound that a minor, almost random external event, a solar flare, a specific sequence of market trades, could trigger a cascading failure. It was elegant, terrifying, and utterly plausible. The paper began to circulate, passed from one analyst to another like a forbidden text. It became a whisper on trading floors and in the research departments of major banks. Have you read the Quantum Entanglement paper? No one knew who wrote it, but its logic was impeccable. The woman on the pension fund's board, Robert's former student, read the paper. She saw the connection between the theoretical risk it described and the aggressive strategy of Blackwood Capital. At their next quarterly review meeting, she raised a concern. "I'm flagging Sterling Blackwood for a risk assessment," she announced. "Their performance has been erratic post-merger, and there is a theoretical framework suggesting their entire model could be a house of cards. I recommend we reduce our exposure until we have more clarity." The pension fund was one of Ethan's largest institutional investors. Their decision to publicly announce a risk assessment was not a withdrawal. It was a red flag, a signal to the entire market that something might be deeply wrong at the heart of Ethan Blackwood's empire. The whispers were becoming a conversation. The tiny cuts were beginning to bleed in earnest. Ethan, lost in his own fortress of code, was so busy looking for a single enemy soldier that he failed to realize the very ground beneath his feet was being systematically hollowed out. He felt the tremors, but he couldn't find the source of the earthquake. His confidence, once his greatest asset, was curdling into a fatal arrogance. He believed he was smarter than the market, smarter than any problem. He never once considered that the problem might be smarter than him. The pension fund's announcement was the first domino. In the fragile ecosystem of high finance, perception is reality. The news of a major risk assessment on Sterling Blackwood hit the financial wires like a shock wave. Ethan, who had always meticulously controlled his public image, was suddenly on the defensive. "It's a procedural review," he barked at a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who cornered him outside his office. "Our fundamentals are stronger than ever. This is nothing more than market jitters from our competitors who are terrified of our new scale." He projected confidence, but behind the scenes panic was beginning to set in. The jitters were real. Other institutional investors, spooked by the pension fund's move, and the circulating white paper, started making calls. They wanted reassurance. They wanted data. They wanted to know why his flagship algorithms were underperforming. Ethan and Isabella worked around the clock trying to calm their investors, but it was like trying to patch 100 leaks in a dam at once. For every investor they placated, 2 more would call, their voices laced with a new sharp edge of doubt. This was the moment Robert Thompson had been waiting for. The foundation was gone. It was time to push. From his quiet study on Bainbridge Island, he made one more call this time, to a respected financial journalist he knew from his old life, a man who valued integrity above all else. "I'm sending you a package, Mark," Robert said. "No names, no sources, but the data inside is verified. It's a technical analysis of the trading architecture at a certain high-profile firm. It confirms with hard data the theoretical vulnerabilities outlined in a recent academic paper." The package was a masterwork of anonymous data dropping. It contained logs subtly altered by Julian, to be untraceable yet accurate in their implication, showing the nanosecond timestamp discrepancies. It included a breakdown of Alpha 7's performance, highlighting the inexplicable and consistent losses. It was everything a journalist needed to connect the dots between the rumors and the reality. It didn't allege fraud or hacking. It alleged something far worse in the tech world: incompetence and fundamental design flaws. Mark's article, published under a dramatic headline, "Cracks in the Code is Sterling Blackwood's billion-dollar algo." A house of cards went viral. It was a match thrown on a field soaked in gasoline. The market opened the next day to a frenzy of selling. The stock price of Sterling Blackwood, which had soared after the merger announcement, began to plummet. It wasn't a dip, it was a cliff. Ethan stood on his trading floor, a modern-day Captain Ahab, on the deck of his sinking ship, watching the red numbers cascade down the screens. "Buy it back," he roared. "Initiate the share buyback program. Stabilize the price." They started pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into buying their own stock, trying to signal strength to the market. But it was like throwing buckets of water against a tsunami. The sell-off was too powerful, fueled by fear and the damning precision of the article. Then came the margin calls. Ethan had leveraged a significant portion of his personal and corporate assets to finance the hostile takeover of Sterling Industries. The banks that had loaned him the money had done so based on the valuation of his company. With the stock price in freefall, the value of his collateral was evaporating. The first call came from Deutsche Bank. "Mr. Blackwood, Your loan-to-value ratio is breached. We need an immediate wire of $200 million to cover your position, or we will be forced to liquidate your holdings." Before he could even process it, another call came from J.P. Morgan. Then another from Goldman Sachs. The cascade had begun. They were demanding billions in collateral that he no longer had. In a desperate final gamble, Ethan turned to Harrison Sterling and Isabella. "We need an emergency infusion from the Sterling Family Trust," he said. His voice strained a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Now, to cover the calls." Isabella looked at him, her face unreadable. She exchanged a glance with her father, who had been watching the meltdown from the corner office with a grim satisfaction. "No," Harrison Sterling said, his voice laced with ice. "This company is toxic. Your name is toxic. The Sterling family will not be throwing good money after bad." "What?" Ethan stammered, looking at Isabella. "Isabella, we're partners. We're getting married." She gave a small, cruel smile. "The engagement was a means to an end, Ethan. A requirement for a merger that was until yesterday advantageous. It is no longer advantageous. In fact, you've become a liability to my family's name. The engagement is off. We're invoking the reputational damage clause in the merger agreement to sever ties. The Sterling name will be removed from the company by the end of the day." The betrayal was so swift, so absolute, it knocked the air from his lungs. He had been a tool, a disposable asset. He had discarded Clara for this, for a woman who was a colder, more ruthless version of himself. The banks didn't wait. As the news of the Sterlings pulling out hit the wire, the liquidations began. Blocks of his stock were dumped onto the market, causing the price to crash into the pennies. The algorithms that had made him a billionaire were being sold off for scrap value to cover his debts. His art collection, his jet, his other properties, all seized and liquidated by creditors within hours. By the time the market closed, the empire of Ethan Blackwood was gone. Sterling Blackwood was a defunct entity, its assets carved up and sold off. His personal fortune had been wiped out. He wasn't just back to zero, he was hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. He stood alone in the dark, cavernous trading floor, the screens now black. The silence was deafening. Just 48 hours earlier, he had been the king of this world. Now he was a ghost haunting its ruins. He stumbled out of the building a dazed, broken man. He didn't even have the money for a taxi. He started walking aimlessly through the rain-slicked streets of the city he once owned. And for the first time in the cold, hollow emptiness of his spectacular failure, he thought of Clara. He thought of her warmth, her kindness, and the child she was carrying. His child. The one piece of his life that had been real, the one thing of true value, and he had thrown it away for a ghost. The weight of that realization was more crushing than the loss of any fortune. The next few days were a blur of humiliation for Ethan. His name, once a synonym for success, was now a punchline in the financial world, a cautionary tale of hubris. He was evicted from the penthouse, the locks changed by the bank that now owned it. He walked out with nothing but a single cardboard box containing a few clothes and personal effects. His friends, the ones who had flocked to his parties and slapped him on the back, no longer answered his calls. He was a pariah. He ended up in a cheap run-down motel by the airport, the kind of place where the carpets were stained and the air smelled of stale smoke and despair. For 2 days, he didn't leave the room. He just sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, the full magnitude of his ruin crashing down on him. He had lost his money, his power, his reputation. But the loss that echoed loudest in the suffocating silence of the motel room was the loss of his humanity. He replayed that final conversation with Clara over and over in his mind. Her shocked, hurt face, the way he had called their child a complication, the cold, dismissive tone he had used to dismantle their life. He hadn't just been a ruthless businessman, he had been a cruel, empty shell of a man. Who had done this to him? He cycled through a list of enemies: Harrison Sterling rival hedge funds, disgruntled ex-employees. But none of it added up. The attack was too precise, too elegant. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was a quiet, systemic unraveling. It felt less like a corporate raid and more like a judgment. His assistant, David Hayes, was the only person who came to see him. He found Ethan sitting in the dark room and placed a bottle of water and a bag of food on the rickety table. "I'm sorry, Ethan," David said, his voice quiet. "Save your pity." Ethan rasped, his voice hoarse. "It's not a pity," David said. I think I know who was behind this. Or at least I have a theory." Ethan looked up, a flicker of interest in his dead eyes. "The day after you asked Clara to leave," David began tentatively, "I saw the returned wire transfer, the one for $500,000. It was refused by an account belonging to a Robert Thompson, your father-in-law. Her dad, the retired programmer." Ethan scoffed. "What about him?" "I was curious, so I did some digging. Not corporate espionage, just public records, old articles from the early days of the internet. Robert Thompson isn't just some programmer, Ethan. In the late 90s, he was known in certain circles as the architect. He designed the Loki protocol for secure transactions and the core logic for the Hyperion trading engine. Your entire company, my entire career. It's all built on the foundation of his work. He's a legend who chose to disappear." The pieces began to click into place in Ethan's shattered mind. The impossible-to-find flaw in his algorithm. The Whisper campaign is based on a deep, fundamental understanding of his systems. The attack wasn't random. It wasn't a rival. It was personal. It was precise. It was from the one man in the world he had never even considered a threat. The quiet father-in-law he had dismissed and disrespected. The man whose daughter he had broken. The realization was a physical blow. He wasn't outmaneuvered by a competitor. He was dismantled by a father protecting his child. It wasn't about money or power. It was about love and justice. All the things he had deemed liabilities. A wave of something akin to terror washed over him. He had picked a fight with a god of his own digital universe, and he had never even seen him. The sheer awesome power of Robert Thompson's quiet fury was terrifying. But beneath the terror was something else, a sliver of profound, gut-wrenching clarity. He deserved this. He had earned every moment of this agonizing downfall. He thought of Clara, safe in her childhood home, protected by this quiet, brilliant giant of a man. He had thrown her out, believing he was casting her into the wilderness. In reality, he had sent her back to the safest fortress in the world. He looked at David. "Where is she?" David hesitated. "I'm not sure I should." "Please, David." Ethan's voice cracked, the arrogance finally completely gone. "I don't want to hurt her. I need to see her." David, seeing the genuine brokenness in his former boss's eyes, sighed. "She's not at her parents' house. Not primarily. I heard from a friend who knows her family that she's been volunteering. Something about helping people who are less fortunate. There's a community outreach center in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. The New Beginnings Center. She's there most days." Ethan nodded slowly. The irony was almost poetic. While he was losing his soulless empire, she was rebuilding her life by helping others. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't about getting his fortune back. It wasn't about asking for forgiveness, because he knew he didn't deserve it. It was about acknowledging the truth of what he had done to the person he had wronged most grievously. It was about facing the wreckage he had made not of his company, but of his own soul. He thanked David, took a long shower, and put on the last clean shirt he owned. For the first time in his life, Ethan Blackwood was going to face a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. He was going to face his wife. The New Beginnings Community Center was a humble brick building a world away from the gleaming steel and glass towers Ethan had once inhabited. The sound of children playing echoed from a small yard, and the smell of soup drifted from an open window. It was a place of real, tangible human connection, everything his former life had lacked. He saw her through the window before he went in. Clara, now visibly pregnant, was sitting at a table patiently helping a young girl with her homework. She looked serene. There was a quiet strength in her face he had never seen before. The ordeal hadn't broken her. It had forged her. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair was tied back, and she was in that moment more beautiful than he had ever seen her in a designer gown. His heart pounded in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide from the shame that was threatening to consume him. But he forced his feet to move, to push open the door and step inside. The warmth of the center was a stark contrast to the cold rain outside. A few people looked up as he entered his expensive, though now slightly disheveled suit, marking him as an outsider. Clara's head lifted, and her eyes met across the room. The laughter and chatter in the room seemed to fade away. For a moment she just stared at him. There was no hatred in her eyes, no anger. There was a deep, profound sadness, and something else, pity, that more than anything broke him. She excused herself from the table and walked toward him, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She stopped a few feet away, creating a space between them that felt like a chasm. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm and even. "What are you doing here?" He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. All the clever speeches, the boardroom negotiations, the commanding orders, all of it was gone. He was left with nothing but the raw, ugly truth of who he was. So he did the only thing that felt right, the only thing that could possibly convey the depth of his shame and the totality of his defeat. In the middle of the crowded community center, Ethan Blackwood, the former titan of industry, sank to his knees. He bowed his head low, his forehead nearly touching the scuffed linoleum floor. It was not a gesture of supplication or a plea for forgiveness. It was an act of complete and total surrender, an acknowledgement of his monstrous crime against her and their child. A gasp went through the room. Clara stood silent, watching the man who had thrown her out, now kneeling at her feet. "Get up, Ethan," she said, softly, but her voice held a new authority. He slowly, painfully rose to his feet, his eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet her gaze. "I didn't come here to ask you to forgive me, Clara," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "There are no words, no apologies that could ever be enough. I came here to tell you that I finally understand. Everything I thought was important, the money, the power, the empire, it was all dust. It was nothing. The only thing that ever had any real value in my entire life was you and our baby. And I threw it away. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you. He finally dared to look up at her. Your father, he said with a ragged breath. He is a great man. He gave me a lesson I desperately needed to learn. Clara listened, her expression unchanging. She had imagined this moment in her darkest hours, fantasized about screaming at him, about making him feel a fraction of the pain he had inflicted on her. But seeing him now, a hollowed-out, broken man, she felt no desire for revenge. She only felt a sad, quiet finality. I accept your apology, Ethan, she said, and he felt a flicker of hope. But she continued, I accept it, not for you, but for me, and for our child. We deserve to live without the weight of that hatred. But that doesn't mean there is a path back for us. You didn't just break my heart. You showed me who you truly are. I can't ever unsee that. She took a step back, reinforcing the distance between them. I'm going to have this baby. I'm going to raise our son, and I'm going to teach him to be everything you are not: kind, compassionate, and a man of integrity. A man like his grandfather. The words were not delivered with malice, but with a simple, devastating clarity. You can be a part of his life if you choose, she went on, but not as my husband, not as the man who lives in my house. You can be his father, but you have to earn that title. You have to rebuild your life, not your fortune, but your character. You have to become a man that our son can one day look up to. That is your only way forward. With that, she turned and walked back to the little girl who was waiting for her, leaving Ethan standing alone in the center of the room. He watched her go, the finality of her words settling into his bones. It wasn't the ending he had wanted, but it was the one he deserved. There would be no magical reconciliation, no wiping the slate clean. There was only a long, arduous road ahead, a chance not to reclaim his lost glory, but to build a new life from the ashes, a life of meaning, and perhaps one day redemption. He turned and walked out of the community center, back into the rain. He had lost his fortune overnight. He had bowed before the woman he had wronged, and in doing so, he had taken the first painful step on the bridge of humility, leaving the monster he had been behind, with a long and uncertain journey toward the man he hoped he could one day become. The story of Ethan Blackwood isn't just about a man losing his fortune. It's a powerful reminder that true wealth is not measured in stock prices or bank accounts. It's measured in integrity, in love, and in the promises we keep to the people who trust us. He had an empire at his fingertips, but was poorer than he could ever imagine. In the end, it took losing everything for him to find the slightest chance at gaining something real, a chance at redemption. Clara's journey shows us the incredible power of quiet strength and the unbreakable bond of family. It reminds us that you don't need an army to fight a monster. Sometimes all you need is a father's unwavering love and the courage to stand on your own. What would you have done in Clara's place? Do you believe a man like Ethan can truly change? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you and served as a powerful lesson, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for listening.